Now let's cover the client setup screen. We do this for Manage Contacts and Clients. And to get here, I go to Clients/Contacts tab at the top of the screen, and then Manage Contacts and Clients. That will open up this screen. A little bit about navigating this screen to begin with here. At the top here, I can click to look up a client. I can actually look up by name, by ID, or by their primary phone number. Also, I have a drop down here to look up just active clients and contacts, all accounts including inactive, just active clients, just active contacts, or I can use filters in the drop down that will, if I've right click and filtered by a field on the screen, it'll use that filtering for my drop down list at the top here. So, and if I just click here, I get a list. I'm looking up my name here. If I start typing, it will autocomplete for me. Now, too, there is the ability here, and I will mention too, at the bottom left of the screen, you'll notice here the record count. So this is 420 of 420. This is a blank. It's ready to add a new client right now if I wanted to. The items, and I can navigate through the client list by using the navigation keys here too if I wish. Okay, but I'm going to stay on my blank one. And if I was manually setting up a new client here, the items with an asterisk here are required fields. So the 10 character ID, it can be up to 10 characters. It does have to be unique for each client. That can be alpha, numeric, or a mixture thereof. The sort name, and that is used for looking up the client in the database. And the billing partner basically is who's in charge of this client in the firm. And you do have to have at least one address in for a client, and it tagged as the bill to in order to generate an invoice. But that is if I wanted to manually add a client. Some buttons here at the top left. There's an add record button, which will automatically get me back to this screen. If I pulled up another client, I wanted to add another client, it will get me to this add client screen. There's also a search contacts, and that will allow me to search for a client or a contact by a portion of their name, or by the contact person's name, by the sort name, or by the bill name. And as an example here, if I go to search contacts, here's my list. Come to filter this, and here if I do ROB and hit OK, here's every client now that has ROB either in the contact person name, in the sort name, or in the bill name. And I can see, here's the contact person, here's the field source that it found the match in, the client ID, and client or contact name for each one. And I can see whether they're a client or a contact here. If I click the binoculars, it will take the main screen to that individual client for me. So a good way to look up where you've just got a partial name. Now also there are some buttons here to timers. That will jump me over to my timer screen to start a timer if I'm doing work for the client that I've selected here. There's also a labels button that will allow me to quickly jump to the individual labels to print a mailing label or to print a number 10 envelope to mail something to the client. Now, I'm going to come hit search for clients and contacts, and I'm going to pull up an existing here. So I'm just going to start typing. It'll autocomplete for me once I type enough. I'm going to hit enter, and here's my information for all rise, robes, and tassels. They are a client. Their ID is ALLR. There is a group ID field here. And what that's used for, I can let the system know that there's an association between clients in the database. A lot of reports can be filtered for a particular group ID. Some can actually be sorted in subtotal by group ID. Also, you'll notice here that that's an underlined item there. So that means that is a drill down. Now I can select a ID that's already in the database here, or I can type an ID. In this case, I've already got an ID filled in for the group. If I double click on that, it'll actually open up and let me see all the members of that group. Here's the ID for each member, the client name, their WHIP currently in the system, unbilled time, and also their billed or AR balance for each individual and the group as a whole. Now, too, here you'll notice that Castle Realty CASTL is the group ID that I'm using, so they are considered to be the parent of this group. I can have all my invoices and statements go to Castle Realty's address. A good example would be I've got one individual that owns all these businesses, but he wants a separate invoice statement for each entity, but he wants them all to come to where his physical address is. So I'm going to close that. Now too, this group uses main address button, and that turns red if I click it. That would now have all the group members' invoices, statements go to Castle Realty's address. There's also a next ID button here if I'm entering new clients and I want the system to generate IDs for me. That is an option on the company setup whether you want that to be exposed or not. Also, to the right of that, there's active contact or client. If I mark a client inactive here, they will not show up in time entry, billing, on reports unless they have outstanding AR, WIP, balances, that type of thing, unfinished due date items if I'm using the due date. But it maintains all the history for them for historical reporting purposes, but they don't show up in the current lookups. There's also a block time entry, and that is useful if I have a client that I need to block time entry temporarily. Maybe they're have an outstanding AR balance that we're in a debate about getting settled, that type of thing, and I don't want staff doing work for them. Okay, there's also a client engagements button here, and that will let me get in, and I'm going to tell it to update my balances for my engagements. Here are the engagements, and if you watch the video on work coded engagement setup, these were my master engagement types, some of them. Here's the detailed description for each of these for this client. And over here, I can see some budgeting and actual time and dollar value to date for these engagements. Also at the bottom here for the one I have selected, I can see the detail of the budgeting that I have set up for this engagement. And you can also quickly jump to the reports. And again, that's on the work code and engagement setup screen to run reports for the engagements. I'm going to close that. Back on the main client screen here, there is a sort name field here. And again, that's one of those required fields. In the case of a company, it would just be the company name like here. If it is an individual, it would be last name, comma, first name, so it would sort properly in reports. Name on bills, if what I have in the sort name is not the way I want it to appear on my invoices and statements, put name on bills. In the case of Freeman, comma, Tom for the sort name, and the name on bills, I might put Mr. Tom Freeman, that type thing. There's also a spouse name here if you want to keep track of the spouse name for the client. Contact person. Now, again, here you'll notice a contact person, email are all drill downs. If I drill down here, I can actually have any number of contacts in here for this particular client. The one that shows up on the main screen is the primary, the main. And for each contact, I can have their name, email address, a description, quite a few options on the description there, work phone, home, mobile. And down here, I can actually have independent addresses and notes about each contact too. But again, this is my primary contact, my default email. And again, that gets pulled from that list. There's also an email invoice too here, and that's in case I'm emailing my invoices and the email for correspondence and the person that needs to get the invoices are two different people in the firm. Website, if I want to keep track of that for my client. Under staffing and location here, there's billing partner. And again, that's who owns the client, if you will, in the firm, who's primary in charge of it. Originator is who brought the business to the firm, typically is what that gets used for. Again, a lot of reports can be filtered by the originator that brought them to the firm. Maybe you need to keep track of that for commissions on new clients or something to that degree. Also, primary staff here is the primary staff that's assigned to this particular client. There's an office location here. We do have a little add-in module that allows you to have multiple addresses for multiple offices, and you can select which address and logo you want on the invoices for this particular client if you have that module. Down here's some marketing information, client or business type. And again, you can modify this list for whatever you want for types here. And again, a lot of the reports in the system can be filtered by client type. Satisfaction level, priority status, service or product, primary service or product, referral source, referred by, if you want to keep track of that for marketing purposes. Under dates right here, I have a start date, end date, date of birth for the client and spouse, anniversary date, incorporated started date. Using these dates, I can generate mailings, email lists that I want to send out to clients, that type of thing. If I wanted to do a mailing or an email to all my clients wishing them a happy birthday for the ones that are having a birthday this month, that type of thing. The service charge miscellaneous here, if there is a service charge to be charged, start in the middle here kind of, service charge I have no for this client, so if I run my service charge routine, he will not get, his invoices, outstanding invoices will not be subject to service charge. There is a slip entry work code selection here, and that pulls from my work codes that I have set up. And anytime if I fill that in, anytime I start a time entry for this client, it will autofill that work code into the work code for me. It's very useful if I've got a client where 99% of what I do for them should all fall under one work code. Staff can always vary that at the time of the entry if they need to. And there's also a monthly rate here for the service charge that will override my default service charge rate. Maybe I've negotiated rates, a lower rate with a client that's trying to get caught up on a past due invoice or something like that. Now on the right hand side at the bottom here, I have some tabs for my information here. Phone info, I can have multiple phone numbers, and you can tag, there's a comment for each one. I can tag the primary. The primary or the main one will always be at the top of the list. Same thing here for addresses. I can have multiple addresses. The bill to address will always be the first one in the list. There's a clone address and phone if I have multiple clients that share contact information. Maybe I have multiple clients within the same business or something to that degree where I need to share address and phone information, or I'm setting up a contact that's associated with a client. Account balances lets me see my current AR balance, WIP balance, expense, unbilled expenses. Allowance would be if I've done progress billing where I've pre-billed before I've actually done the work. So I haven't got time associated with that bill yet. So it actually builds an allowance for future time to get cleared against. Net unbilled and total account value. Now all these are drill downs here that will let you get into the detail of the WIP, the detail invoice and payment listing, that type thing. And we'll go over those screens in another segment. The top right here are my client notes. I've got this set for note summary right now, so I can see each note here. Each note is date, time, and staff tagged that entered the note. In the case of this first note here, it's actually associated with a task in the due date system. Again, if you have our due date module, this is associated with the 11/20 for 2011 for this client. Here, there's a red note between each note here, time and date and staff stamp, and then the note that was entered. Go to edit notes. I can edit existing notes, or I can click here to enter a new note for a client. And now when I go back to the summary, you'll see that that's the top of the list there. There is a permanent note field. This is one big note field here, if you will. And if there is anything entered in here, it's kind of a high priority note. If there is anything in this field, when you come into the screen, whether this tab is selected or not, the text will be in red. So it alerts you that there is information you need to look at there. High priority notes again. If you have our calendar contact management module, the to-dos and appointments tab here lets you see any appointments on anyone's calendar for this particular client. Very useful. You get a client calls up, says he has, I know I've got an appointment next week. Can't remember what day it is. Can't remember if it's next week or the week after. Rather than have to go look through everybody's calendar, you can come here and say, yes, you got an appointment on the 9th with Fritz, and actually, according to this, looks like he's going to be coming to your location for the meeting. And from 11 to 6 p.m. So quite a long meeting there. But again, you would see a list here of any appointments, and you can select whether you want to see all the appointments, just open ones, just completed for specific dates, that type of thing. The History tab lets me see the history of time entries. Now, this is every time entry that's ever been entered for this client. Does not matter if it has been invoiced, if it is setting in WIP unbilled, or if it's been written off. It still shows up here. But I can tell date, hours, amount, text that was entered with it, the work code that was on it, and the staff that entered it. There are some filters here. I can filter if I just want to see entries for a particular work code. I can do that, and it will filter this list so I'm just seeing the entries for that particular work code. The Analysis tab here lets me see, and I'm looking at 2011 here in my demo data, and here I can see every work code that I had revenue for. If there was time cleared with it, the time at standard hourly rates, this is my net realized billing on it. So this reflects any write-up or write-down, and totals for the time at standard and the net realized billing. So for this client overall for the 2011 year, I did some write-down on the time. Over here gives me some average bill amount, maximum bill amount, some averages, maximums, last time slip date, last transaction date, and a current AR aging. So let me see where I stand currently with the client. Just kind of a good quick overview of where you stand with the client from here. Now, there are some more tabs to this for this same client. If I go to more contact information, I can assign billers here. And again, these biller assignments, I can filter several reports in the system by the biller that's assigned here if I want to. You can also see if somebody's currently working on an invoice for this client, what the preferred bill type for this client is, and what their sales tax rate is if he's subject to sales tax. In the section here for credit limits, I can set credit limits overall, AR and WIP, AR credit limit, or WIP credit limit, and that's expenses and time. If I set a credit limit here, if a client hits one of these limits, a couple of things happens. The billing partner for that client gets a little on-screen pop-up if they're in ImagineTime, or the next time they go into ImagineTime, letting them know that all rise, robes, and tassels hit a credit limit. Also, it automatically blocks time entry for that client, and that way staff cannot enter more time until that issue is addressed, whether that be adjusting the credit limit or getting a check in the door or an invoice out the door. The Leads email setup is really for the legal industry. Leads is a standardized formatting of invoices for electronic transfer. Miscellaneous items down here. The main things here is really just reference information, and the last one, the client ID for PDF emails. If I'm using Social Security numbers for client IDs, there is an alternate ID, and that's the ID that's been assigned to this particular client that will show up on the PDF so that it doesn't have his Social Security number on there if you're using Social Security numbers for client IDs. At the top right of this screen, those user-defined fields that we had talked about in the company setup, you can relabel these. You have a couple of text fields here, some date fields, and a general memo field. So these allow you to, maybe you need one of these fields here for their QuickBooks password would be a good example. So again, you can relabel these used for whatever you want. In the mailing list selection section here, I can have any number of mailing lists set up on the company setup screen. Each client can belong to any one, as this client is, or any combination of those mailing lists. And using these mailing lists along with that dating information, add birth date, start date, that type of thing from the first screen, I can generate mailing labels, I can address envelopes, I can generate a custom letter in Word and customize it by putting in bookmarks to pull in, name, contact person, even you can bring in balances, that type of thing if you need to for a collection letter maybe. but you can generate mailings that you're going to send out to clients. You can also generate email blasts there that you're going to send out to clients. So a very useful tool for generating contacts with clients. And especially if you're using our calendar contact management, this can be for potential clients that you're courting their business. At the bottom right here, I have taxpayer due date information, their federal ID, social security numbers, fiscal year end, that type thing. The Manage Edit Deadlines takes you into the due date management, workflow management screens for this client. I'm not going to cover that right now. That's covered in another video. There is a simple fixed fees here. And for this client, and again, now I will mention here that you can rename these if you want to, but like for this one, I have a bookkeeping invoice. It gets a $500 invoice each month. Here's the revenue work code. If there is no time at all for the client when I generate this invoice, that's the revenue work code the revenue will go toward. If there is time under that work code, the way I have it set here, it's going to clear that time out of WHIP when I post the invoice. I do have options there of clearing all the time if it's an all-inclusive arrangement, clearing time just for that specific work code, or I can tell the system not to clear time if I want to come back and clear specific time against the invoice later. Bill month, if desired, typically would not be used for bookkeeping because that's if it's just going to happen in a particular month, if it's an annual type thing. Now here's my bill memo description. This is a short narrative type invoice, and this is the text that will appear on the invoice when I print it, email it to the client. Now something I can do here, I can do a caret, which is the shift 6 on your keyboard, and a capital P for period, and a caret Y for year. And over on the billing dashboard videos, we talked about those caret P and caret Y replacements. That way, one time when I start to generate this batch of invoices, I tell the system what to insert for period and year, and it updates all these descriptions for me automatically. And you can see here, I have several options, and if I go into here, it will get me into the super bill setup for this client. It gives me a lot more flexibility than just the one line item. And again, watch the video on the super bills for a lot more detail about what you can do with super bills. But that's the simple fixed fee setup for the auto biller from the dashboard. There's some options here if you want this synced with Outlook, if you're syncing your, and again, if you have our calendar contact management module, if you're syncing your contacts with Outlook. There's also some marketing report filters here. There's quite a bit of filtering I can do here. If I wanted to run a report of all my clients that have been set up for the last 3 months, new clients, that type thing, I can do that using date created. Would highly recommend that you come in and play with the filtering here. Look at some of the reports you can generate. You can generate reports, or you can filter, like here, if I wanted to come here and do okay, I'm going to put in a date range, and the date created here of 1/1/12 to 5/5/12, and filter my form. And now come back, and I can see at the bottom left here, I've got one client there. And there is my one client that was set up during that date range in the database. And at this point, I could use my navigation keys at the bottom left if I had multiples to step through them. Also, if I wanted to, if I had multiples here, I could right click in the name at this point and sort it, ascending or descending, that type of thing. There is right click functionality on this screen, gives you quite a bit of ability to filter by selection, that type thing, sort based on any field on the screen pretty much. But back over to our reporting, just if I click on filter right here, it will remove the filter that I just put on that. And again, play with this. You can find a lot of good useful information here. Also, there is a closing tab here. And now that will let me see if I've filled in projected revenue, projected close date, the actual close date, product or service type, several fields here that will show up on some of those reports that you can run from the marketing report screen. But that covers the client setup screen. And again, it can be used for clients and contacts if you have the calendar contact management module.